People sometimes misunderstand what Marine infantry is supposed to do. We were never a hostage rescue force, and we were never trained as close-quarters specialists whose primary mission was clearing buildings room by room like a police tactical team. We were United States Marine Corps infantrymen. Our job was much more direct. When the military faced a problem that demanded overwhelming force, they sent Marines. We moved forward, destroyed obstacles, and accomplished the mission. My path into the Marine Corps started long before combat ever became part of my life. My father served as an officer with the United States Capitol Police in Washington District of Columbia. My mother spent time working for the Federal Bureau of Investigation before taking a position with the Prince William County government. I grew up just outside Quantico, Virginia, surrounded by Marines. Seeing them every day made military service feel natural. And from an early age, I knew that was the direction I wanted to take. People often ask whether the attacks of September 11th pushed me to join. The truth is that I had already made my decision before that day arrived. I was attending college when the attacks happened, and although they strengthened my commitment, they did not create it. I already knew I wanted to earn the title of Marine. I completed the Reserve Officers Training Corps program through the Virginia Military Institute. After receiving my commission, I reported to the basic school at Quantico. From there, I attended the Infantry Officers course, also located at Quantico. Once that training was complete, I checked into 1st Battalion, 8th Marines. In many ways, I never really left home. My parents lived only about 20 minutes away, which made life convenient, although it also meant I never completely escaped family oversight. Looking back, it was a good situation overall. I joined the battalion around April of 2004. Before deploying overseas, we conducted a major training exercise at March Air Force Base in Riverside, Southern California. The exercise prepared us for what we expected to face in Iraq. After finishing that training in May, we deployed in June. When we arrived in Iraq, we established ourselves at Al-Assad Air Base. Most of our operations centered around Haditha in Al-Anbar province. At that point in the war, the battlefield felt like it was changing. The large-scale invasion had already taken place the previous year, and what we were witnessing was the beginning of a growing insurgency. During the summer of 2004, the enemy was certainly active, but conditions were still far less intense than what would eventually unfold later that year in Fallujah. Rocket attacks happened from time to time. Improvised explosive devices occasionally struck our vehicles. Mortar rounds landed often enough to keep everyone alert. 1st Platoon was ambushed near Haditha. Even with those dangers, compared to what came later, things were still relatively manageable. After the First Battle of Fallujah in April of 2004, there was constant discussion throughout the battalion about whether we would eventually return. Everyone understood that insurgent forces had turned the city into a sanctuary. It was only a matter of time before someone had to take it back. One day during the summer, our battalion leadership traveled to an overpass overlooking the city. From that position, we studied Fallujah through binoculars, observing its layout from a distance while discussing different approaches for a future assault. That reconnaissance was the first moment I truly believed there was a real possibility that we would be the ones ordered into the city. Even then, nothing was official. Weeks passed without confirmation. Rumors circulated, but no formal orders arrived. While we were back at Al-Assad, subtle signs began to suggest something significant was developing around Fallujah. Conversations became more guarded. Information was closely controlled. Everyone sensed that something major was coming, even though no one would say it openly. Then, in the middle of one night, everything changed. Our executive officer woke both me and my roommate without warning. His instructions were brief and direct. "Pack your gear. Get your platoon ready. We are moving to Fallujah." That was all we needed to hear. Within hours, we were heading toward Camp Fallujah, knowing we were about to take part in an operation that would define the rest of our military careers. My company received one of the most demanding assignments in the opening phase of the assault. while other units secured routes and established footholds throughout the city. Alpha Company was ordered to drive directly toward the center of Fallujah. Our objective was the mayor's complex. We had to seize it, secure it, and hold the position until the remainder of the battalion could fight its way forward and link up with us. My platoon received responsibility for defending one section of the perimeter surrounding that complex. As we prepared for the attack, every emotion imaginable ran through my mind. Determination, anticipation, confidence, uncertainty. They all existed together. We reached the assembly area north of Fallujah on the 8th of November. For the next 2 days, we dug fighting positions and waited for the order to move. While we waited, the battlefield was being prepared around us. Day and night, artillery pounded enemy positions. Aircraft delivered precision strikes almost without interruption. Every explosion reminded us that the assault was getting closer. We watched the bombardment continue around the clock, knowing that once it stopped, we would be the ones moving forward. The night the attack finally began remains one of the most unforgettable displays of military power I have ever witnessed. Engineers launched mine-clearing line charges into the city's defenses. Those enormous explosive systems fired long lines packed with explosives across suspected minefields and improvised explosive device belts, clearing lanes for advancing forces. The explosions were overwhelming. Massive fireballs lit the darkness while shock waves rolled across the ground. Machine guns soon joined the fight. Tracer rounds streaked across the night sky in every direction. From our position, we watched the entire battle begin while waiting for our own order to advance. As reports came in that members of the breaching force had already become casualties, the reality of what lay ahead settled heavily on everyone. More than anything else, one question occupied my thoughts. Would I perform the way my Marines deserved when the fighting became real? Until then, I had experienced enemy fire, but nothing close to the kind of battle we were about to enter. I kept asking myself whether I would remain calm, make the right decisions, and lead my platoon the way they expected me to. That burden weighed on me more than my own safety. We crossed into Fallujah during the night of the 10th of November. The assault force breached the city's defenses first, and once the opening had been created, my company pushed through the friendly lines and drove straight toward the center of the city. For a brief period, Alpha Company became the most forward element out of all 6 battalions participating in the operation. Something surprised us during that movement. We encountered almost no resistance. Later, we learned why. The insurgents rarely chose to fight aggressively after dark. Their strength came during daylight, when they could better observe our movements and use the city streets and buildings to their advantage. We reached the mayor's complex without taking significant fire. Marine tanks blasted openings through the compound walls, allowing our amphibious assault vehicles to drive directly inside. Once we entered the compound, every platoon immediately moved to its assigned sector and established defensive positions exactly as planned. Everything seemed almost too quiet. That silence disappeared the moment the sun rose. As daylight spread across the city, enemy fire erupted from every direction imaginable. The mayor's complex sat directly along the boundary separating 2 regimental sectors. At first glance, that did not appear to be a major concern. In reality, it complicated everything. Boundaries determined who controlled supporting fires, where different units could maneuver, and who had authority over various sections of the battlefield. Coordinating with another regiment under combat conditions introduced challenges that became obvious almost immediately. Before long, rounds were coming at us from all sides. Rifle fire cracked overhead. Machine guns hammered our positions. Rocket-propelled grenades streaked across the compound. There was no safe direction to look. The entire complex was under attack. Instead of reacting emotionally, everyone fell back on training. Marines moved into prepared fighting positions behind walls, inside damaged buildings, and behind any cover that offered protection. Every man understood his assignment before the first shot was fired, and that preparation paid off. People often ask how anyone can organize that kind of chaos. The answer is simple. You depend on your non-commissioned officers. I was fortunate to have outstanding sergeants and corporals. Those Marines were experienced fighters who understood exactly what needed to happen. Every squad leader knew his assigned sector of fire. They controlled their Marines, maintained discipline, and continued fighting without waiting for constant direction from me. That allowed me to do my job. I moved from one squad to another, checking positions, correcting problems, adjusting fields of fire, coordinating resupply, and making sure every Marine had the ammunition and support he needed. At the same time, I stayed in contact with the company commander, coordinated supporting fires, and managed whatever resources were available. About 24 hours later, the remainder of the battalion reached our position. With everyone finally linked together, we reorganized inside the mayor's complex to prepare for the next phase of the operation. Then the order came. We would no longer remain behind defensive walls. We were going on the offensive. Our mission was straightforward: find the enemy, close with him, destroy him. That meant advancing house by house through the city. Even after everything we had already experienced, receiving that order made my stomach tighten. Defending a fixed position behind walls is one thing. Walking into streets where the enemy chooses every firing position is something completely different. That was the mission Marine infantry had been trained to perform, but knowing that did not eliminate the tension. I remember feeling more nervous than at almost any other point in my life. Before our company began moving, another platoon had already crossed south of a major roadway known as Phase Line Fran. It was essentially a wide highway running through the center of Fallujah, something comparable to a major interstate back home. Crossing that open stretch of pavement exposed anyone moving across it to enemy observation and fire. To support the assault, our battalion positioned heavy weapons throughout nearby buildings. 50 caliber machine guns opened fire. Mark 19 automatic grenade launchers joined in. Javelin missile teams prepared to engage anything threatening our advance. Their purpose was simple: suppress the enemy long enough for the rifle platoons to move. When the supporting fires reached full intensity, I led my platoon across Phase Line Fran. We sprinted across the highway and linked up alongside Lieutenant Elliot Arian's platoon on the opposite side. The moment we entered a narrow alley beyond the road, everything changed. That alley became one of the defining fights of my life. We eventually gave it a name of our own. We simply called it the alley. The passage stretched roughly 25 to 50 meters before splitting sharply in both directions. As soon as we reached that intersection, it became obvious the enemy had been waiting for us. The ambush began instantly. Machine guns opened fire, rifles erupted from multiple positions, rocket-propelled grenades slammed into the area, rounds struck walls, pavement, and buildings around us from every direction. The fight exploded into a fast-moving gun battle that continued for hours. The insurgents knew every street, every building, and every escape route. That knowledge gave them a tremendous advantage. Urban combat is unforgiving under any circumstances. Whenever an enemy occupies a building before you arrive, he already controls the terrain. Charging directly into a defended structure almost always favors the defender. I learned that lesson quickly. We were not a police tactical team trained to clear occupied rooms one by one whenever another option existed. We were Marine infantry. Our strength came from combining infantry with armor, artillery, and overwhelming firepower. Instead of attacking enemy-held buildings head-on, we used every combat asset available. 2 Marine tanks led our movement. Mounted on the rear of each tank was an external telephone system that infantrymen called the grunt phone. Normally, the connecting cable was short, forcing anyone using it to remain dangerously close to the vehicle. We solved that problem by attaching approximately 50 feet of additional wire, allowing Marines to communicate with the tank while remaining behind cover. One of my squad leaders, Leo, grabbed that handset and spoke directly to the tank commander. His instructions were unmistakable. I need everything in front of us destroyed from the 3 o'clock position all the way to the 9 o'clock position. The tank crews understood immediately. High explosive rounds crashed into buildings ahead of us. Heavy machine guns swept the streets. Wall after wall collapsed beneath concentrated fire. The effect on the insurgents was immediate. They could not remain in those positions. As soon as the tanks forced them back, my Marines advanced behind the armor. Some moved across rooftops, others advanced along the streets. I stayed on the ground behind the tanks, directing the movement and keeping the platoon together. We advanced deliberately. No unnecessary rushing, no reckless charges. Every step was earned before we took the next one. Looking back, I credit much of our success that day to the patience of our company commander. Many leaders feel pressure to push faster simply because combat is underway. He resisted that temptation. Instead, he allowed us to establish favorable conditions before each movement. The tanks would destroy enemy positions. Supporting weapons would suppress any remaining resistance. Only then would we move forward. That steady pressure never gave the insurgents an opportunity to recover. It forced them backward one position at a time until they either fled or died. Momentum came from discipline, not speed. Even though our advance was deliberate, there was no illusion that we could clear every single room inside every building as we moved through the city. That simply was not realistic. Our focus remained on the locations where we knew the enemy was actively fighting from. We eliminated those threats, secured the immediate area, and continued pushing forward without losing momentum. The firefight stretched on for several exhausting hours. We left the mayor's complex sometime during the early afternoon and fought until darkness finally settled over the city. Every block demanded another engagement. Every intersection had the potential to become another ambush. Of course, there was always the possibility that enemy fighters remained hidden behind us. In fact, I have no doubt we bypassed some of them. Later in the operation, we returned to conduct more thorough clearing missions. But on that first day, our priority was maintaining pressure and continuing the assault. The insurgents fought a mobile battle. Whenever we forced them out of one position, they fired as they withdrew, trying to slow our advance before disappearing deeper into the city. They were not interested in standing their ground against overwhelming firepower. Instead, they continually fell back, looking for another opportunity to attack from a different location. Most of the men we encountered were not Iraqis. From everything we observed during that deployment, we were fighting foreign extremists who had entered Iraq from neighboring countries. Many came from Syria and elsewhere in the region. They were not particularly well equipped, but someone was clearly supplying them. We noticed patterns. Many wore the same style of shoes. Many carried large amounts of cash. Their equipment varied, but there were enough similarities to suggest organized financial support. Despite that, we never underestimated them. A rifle in the hands of an inexperienced fighter can still kill just as effectively as one carried by a professional. Respecting the enemy was essential to survival. They rarely operated in large formations. Instead, they moved in small groups of 2 or 4 men. Those compact teams allowed them to travel quietly through the city while presenting a very small target. Finding them often proved more difficult than defeating them once contact was made. People sometimes ask what goes through your mind during a close-range firefight. Is it training? Is it instinct? Is it simply trying to shoot before someone shoots you? For me, the answer developed during that battle in the alley. Looking back, I believe every successful infantryman needs certain qualities before stepping into combat. The first is optimism. That may sound strange, but Marines are routinely placed in situations that appear almost impossible. If you convince yourself that failure is inevitable, you stop solving problems. Optimism is not blind confidence. It is the belief that no matter how bad things become, there is still a solution if you keep thinking and keep fighting. The second quality is far more difficult. You have to come to terms with your own mortality. For me, that happened during the fighting in the alley. I reached a point where I accepted that death was a real possibility. I certainly did not want to die, and I fought with everything I had to stay alive. But once I accepted that reality, fear stopped controlling my decisions. After that moment, everything became surprisingly clear. The danger never disappeared. The bullets were still flying. The explosions continued, but hesitation disappeared. Instead of wondering what might be waiting around the next corner, I simply focused on the next task that needed to be completed. That became instinct. Other Marines may describe the experience differently, but that was my own turning point. The days that followed looked different from that first brutal engagement, although they were no less dangerous. Eventually, our platoon occupied a position that everyone later nicknamed the Alamo. Looking back, it probably was not the strongest place we could have chosen. It was an isolated house sitting in a relatively open area near the middle of the city. The surrounding terrain offered very little protection. Once we established ourselves there, the enemy quickly recognized our location and concentrated their attacks against us. Before long, we were pinned down. Leaving the position became almost impossible. For roughly 24 hours, we fought from that single house under nearly constant enemy fire. It felt as though every insurgent in the area knew exactly where we were. The fighting never seemed to stop. Leo was wounded there. Fox was wounded there. Every Marine inside that house was exhausted. By then, we had already spent 2 to 3 days under continuous combat conditions. Sleep had become a luxury none of us could count on. Because there were only a limited number of effective firing positions, we rotated Marines through them in shifts. One group fought while another tried to rest for a short period before switching places. The rooftop became one of our primary defensive positions. That was also where Leo and Fox were hit. The enemy fired a rocket-propelled grenade directly onto the roof. The roof itself offered very little real protection. A low parapet built from limestone bricks surrounded the edge. Those bricks were thick enough to slow incoming rounds, but they were far from bulletproof. Enemy rifle fire repeatedly struck the walls. Bullets punched through the limestone, often losing enough energy that they failed to cause serious injuries, but every impact showered us with dust and fragments. The rooftop became increasingly dangerous. I was trying to coordinate our defense over the radio when I dropped to one knee. At that exact moment, the rocket-propelled grenade slammed into the parapet. The explosion shattered the limestone wall. Chunks of brick exploded in every direction. Dust filled the air. Leo was wounded. Fox was wounded. For a brief moment, the rooftop became complete chaos. It did not take long to make the obvious decision. Remaining on that roof no longer made tactical sense. We abandoned the rooftop and shifted our defense to lower firing positions inside the building, using windows and more protected locations instead. The fight continued, but at least we were no longer exposing ourselves unnecessarily. At one point, even the regimental commander, Colonel Tucker, arrived at our position. Ironically, once he reached us, he found himself trapped by the intensity of the fighting. The enemy controlled too much of the surrounding ground for him to leave safely. Much of our command and control took place from a small covered porch attached to the house. The protective wall around it was extremely low. Whenever we needed to communicate over the radios, we stayed flat on the ground to avoid incoming rounds. When it was time to fight, we rose just high enough to engage before dropping back into cover again. That routine repeated itself hour after hour while enemy fire continued striking around us. Eventually, we received an opportunity to break out. Earlier, when we entered the position, we had blasted an opening through one of the compound walls using a shoulder-launched multi-purpose assault weapon. Now we used that same opening to escape. An amphibious assault vehicle backed up to the breach. The rear ramp dropped. We sprinted aboard as quickly as possible. Another vehicle followed behind it, loading more Marines. Once everyone was inside, the vehicles pushed south, carrying us away from the Alamo. After reaching a new location, we dismounted, established another foothold, reorganized, and continued driving deeper into the city. The battle was far from over. Neither were we. By the time we fought our way out of the Alamo position, the operation had settled into a relentless rhythm. Every day brought another series of firefights, another block to clear, and another set of buildings that had to be secured. The nature of the combat changed from one location to the next, but the pressure never eased. Every street demanded caution, and every doorway had the potential to hide another armed fighter. The physical exhaustion was unlike anything I had experienced before. We had been operating for days with almost no real rest. Sleep came only in brief moments whenever someone else could cover your position. Even then, it was impossible to fully relax because the sound of gunfire, explosions, and incoming rounds never completely stopped. Despite the fatigue, the platoon kept moving. Every Marine understood that slowing down or becoming careless could cost lives. We trusted one another completely, and that trust became more valuable than any piece of equipment we carried. As the operation continued, we steadily forced the insurgents farther through the city. Some fought until they were killed. Others withdrew whenever they realized they could no longer hold their position. Their pattern rarely changed. They would engage us, attempt to inflict casualties, then break contact and disappear into another group of buildings where they hoped to repeat the process. Eventually, after weeks of continuous combat, we reached the final phase of the battle. I remember leaving Fallujah on the 9th of December, almost 1 month after we had entered the city. It was difficult to believe how much had happened during those weeks. Our platoon had paid a heavy price. 11 Marines had been wounded. We had also lost Bradley. That loss stayed with every one of us. Before the battle began, many of us had been impatient. We were Marines, and we wanted to do the job we had trained for. We talked about getting into a real fight. We wanted to prove ourselves. We wanted to test everything we had learned. Combat has a way of changing that attitude very quickly. After only a few days inside Fallujah, no one was looking for another firefight. Once you begin losing friends, war stops being an abstract idea or an opportunity to prove yourself. It becomes painfully real. Every casualty reminds you that the men beside you are not invincible. They are fathers, sons, brothers, and friends. By the time we finally left the city, we were ready for it to be over. 20 years have passed since Fallujah, and I have remained on active duty throughout that time. Looking back now as a lieutenant colonel, my perspective is very different from the one I had as a young lieutenant leading Marines through those streets. The battle shaped every stage of my career. Its lessons followed me into every assignment that came afterward. I returned to Iraq for another deployment. Later, I commanded a rifle company in Afghanistan. I also served twice as an operations officer before eventually taking command of a battalion. Every leadership position forced me to think back on what I had learned during those weeks in Fallujah. The single most important lesson had nothing to do with tactics or weapons. It was learning how to evaluate risk. Young Marines naturally want to push forward. They want action. They want to close with the enemy and accomplish the mission. I understand that mindset because I once felt exactly the same way. Aggressiveness has its place. In fact, it is often necessary. But experience taught me that aggression without purpose is simply unnecessary danger. Every time a commander orders Marines into harm's way, he is making a decision that may change lives forever. Because of that, every risk must have a clear military purpose. You do not expose your people to danger simply because you can. You do it only when the objective justifies the cost. That became the foundation of my leadership philosophy. I do not believe anyone can truly learn how to assess combat risk inside a classroom. It comes only through experience. You develop that judgment by making difficult decisions, accepting responsibility for them, and living with the consequences afterward. Everything I experienced in Fallujah influenced how I approached leadership for the rest of my career. Whether we were conducting live fire training, preparing for deployment, or operating in combat, I constantly asked myself the same question: is this risk necessary? If the answer was yes, then we committed ourselves completely and carried out the mission with confidence. If the answer was no, then I refused to gamble with the lives of my Marines. The mission always mattered, but so did bringing as many of my Marines home as possible. That is the responsibility every commander carries. Fallujah taught me that responsibility in the hardest way imaginable, and it has remained with me every day since.